you guys for coming out and being part of Fall Writers Weekend with Melissa Febos. I'm going to give an introduction and then we're going to have a conversation, and then Melissa will read for a bit, and then we'll open up the conversation to everybody else's questions, because my questions are going to be kind of narrowly focused on some things that have come up in my class where my students were reading parts of Abandon Me, Melissa's most recent book. So I'm going to ask questions that kind of came up for me while teaching some of that, and I'm sure you all have other things that you would like to ask, so we welcome that. So Melissa Febos' writing, it generates a lot of adjectives such as fierce and brave, you know. Raw, that's a good one, excellent. But here's, The Economist magazine wrote a review, and I was, perusing the blurbs and reviews, and I came across this one that I especially liked about Whip Smart. Whip Smart, well, it's about Whip Smart that I think it actually captures the real power of the work beyond the words fierce, brave, raw, right? Here's the excerpt. Memoirs about salacious adventures have two requirements. They must be generous with the goods and astute with the analysis. Febos delivers on both, and with relish. No salty detail escapes her eye or goes unexamined. Febos is too self-aware to not see her past clearly, and too talented a writer to not make it fascinating. So I thought that captured it pretty well, because it's not just like, here are the details, it's what you make of them that turns writing into art, really. Now here are the biography essentials of memoirist Melissa Febos. Melissa Febos is the author of the critically acclaimed memoir Whip Smart in 2010, and the essay collection Abandon Me, which came out in 2017. Abandon Me was a LAMBDA Literary Award finalist, a Triangle Publishing Award finalist, an Indie Next Pick, and was named a Best Book of 2017 by Esquire, Book Riot, The Cut, Electric Literature, The Brooklyn Rail, Bustle, Refinery 29, Salon, The Rumpus, and others, if there are any others left. Her second essay collection will be published by Bloomsbury in 2020. Her work has been widely anthologized and appears in too many journals to name, but all the good ones. She holds an MFA from Sarah Lawrence College and is currently an associate professor of creative writing at Monmouth University, where she directs the MFA program. So I want to start by asking some questions really that I was thinking about the memoir Whip Smart. So that's the story of working as a dominatrix in a dungeon in Manhattan for 4 years. And it leads to a lot of questions about writing about things like addiction and sex and power, and a lot of compelling and often really dark subjects. But I'm also interested in sort of the beauty that ultimately seems to arise from those experiences. And I kind of want to start there, because it's almost counterintuitive. Like, it's so easy and can be so quick to talk about things that are dark, but it's the light that comes out of them that's really compelling to me. Mm-hmm. My students and I were talking a bit this semester about the shift that we're seeing in creative nonfiction and memoir generally, about how we seem to have lost the need to be ironic all the time, and to avoid talking truly about things that might be considered sentimental. So in your work, I noticed, particularly as I moved out of Whip Smart and started reading Abandon Me, I was noticing, like, your willingness to talk about what love actually means, not just need, but like from need comes love. So I'm just wondering if we're reading you correctly, that those things are really the things that are what you're getting at when you're talking about the things that are the raw, fierce things.
You mean need and love?
Need and love, yeah. Things that, like, I think 10 years ago we weren't allowed to talk about. I mean, they're too squishy.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I can't speak for sort of the culture at large, but for me, certainly 10 years ago, I didn't really have access to a lot of the kinds of love that I do now. I think for a lot of us, there's sort of this organic movement through need toward love, right? Which I guess mimics, like, infancy, Like, only when we become autonomous, integrated individuals are we capable of experiencing a kind of love that's not predicated on dependency, you know? And so I think, like, if they're looked at as a kind of continuum of my development as a person in my books, which I think they can be, Wismart is very much about sort of all of the dynamics that I had to move through in order to get to a more direct examination of sort of love and attachment and vulnerability, and what those things, what it meant to risk something in relationships, right? And so it's sort of like power games and performance and I don't know, ways of enacting desire and connection and the self that are sort of fractured, and where you can just inhabit a part of yourself, right? And maybe sort of perform it for an audience where the stakes are lower, which I think is what a lot of us do. Even if you're not in a dungeon or on heroin, I think we do that in our young relationships where we're performing aspects of ourselves that we feel comfortable being or that we wish we were or that we can't escape, right? And then Abandon Me is sort of about moving through an idea of love, like really getting down to the bone of dependency and the way that I looked at it as synonymous with love, and the way that I think our sort of culture at large looks at it, or at least sort of what capitalism has done to sell it to us as need and dependency, and how like this idea of love that we have and are sort of raised on, at least in terms of like media and marketing, is very much about a really sort of unhealthy, ungenerous, like wounded, insatiable sort of need, and not about generosity and agency and care.
So in Whip Smart, you're going through this kind of journey. We were speaking just a few minutes ago about awakening to power and just, growing up really in certain ways, coming into adulthood and power. And it seems like Abandon Me is kind of continuing that journey into being able to see, like, oh, so that's what this is. That these experiences are, the thing that you pass through to learn really what actual love is. So, do you think you arrived there in Abandon Me? Do we ever answer that question? Like, what the hell is it?
No, I don't think I arrived there in it, at least not in what I cover in the book. I think I moved through what I needed to. Abandon Me sort of ends on the precipice of it, I think in Abandon Me it was like I went all the way to the end of the kind of love that like love songs are about, and like poems are often about, and that tragedies are based on, where it was all about need and dependency, and the stakes just felt incredibly high all the time. It was like a very selfish, desperate situation. Very romantic in the sense that it was sort of living within a story that wasn't sort of built on a foundation of actually knowing or caring or considering the other person or even seeing them, right? Where you're just sort of projecting your stories onto each other. And I think it was the complete failure of that kind of love. You know what I mean? Like it was everything, all of the secret desires of my heart, which were to be like showered in gifts and to fly all over the country and to get crazy love letters and have poems written about me, and it was a living hell. Like literally hell. Like it was the hard, I mean, and I document a lot of this in Whip Smart, but like I've been through other kinds of hell and it was worse. Like that kind of like, that apex of sort of romantic love was just it was the most miserable 2 years of my life. And so that story sort of ends on the moment that I sort of step in the other direction. And I think probably not this next book, but the one after that will be about what happened after that.
So this is one of the really interesting things really about being a serial memoirist, right? There are different ways to do it, but in some cases, I think I'm tipping to some material that's further in my questioning, but what the heck is coming up? So we watch a person kind of developing this unfolding awareness on the page, and it's not like, oh, really, you shouldn't write this till you're finished, because when you're finished, you're dead, I mean, like, right? We're going to keep unfolding.
That's what I tell my students all the time. I'm like, the only real stories end is when you die.
Right.
Like, that's it. There's only one ending to the story, and that's it, as far as I know.
Well, we never really. I suppose maybe the Buddha arrived at
Yeah.
I don't know. But if we're always in the process of
Yeah.
deepening and
Yeah.
stuff, that it means that every book that comes before is its own perfect statement of
Yeah.
what it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Well, I'm presuming that readers are also on journeys. You know,
Yeah, I mean, I really believe that, like, you know, my partner has a poem, I'm trying to remember. She has actually a series of poems that are all entitled, "Every moment I've been alive, I've been at the height of my powers." And it sounds like, oh, yeah! But it's actually a literal statement where it's like, every moment I've been alive, I've been at the height of my powers. Just like, I am the most perfect version of myself at every moment that I am living. I'm doing the best that I can. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and I think that that's true about my work as well, where it's like Whip Smart is almost unbearable for me to look at sometimes because I've changed so much. Like, I started writing it when I was 26. And, you know, like, my memories, my experiences of it, my style of writing sentences have evolved since then. And yet, it's like my first baby, you know, like, it was the best thing that I could possibly write at the time. It was actually far beyond my capabilities.
It was
as a
far
writer
beyond
at the
their
time.
capabilities.
Yeah, I think that's true of both my books, that they were by far the best thing I'd ever written, and actually transcended my talent at the time because they were a story that I needed to tell, and so my skill level had to rise to meet the material that I needed to create.
Yeah, it's interesting because I really was literally going to eventually bring us to a discussion about how fascinating it is sometimes to watch writers become interested in a topic that, whether consciously or not, that is going to be their topic. I mean, I know personally my first book was a road trip book, and my second book is a road trip book. I didn't mean to do that. And what's really funny to me about that, when I realized, oh my God, look what I've done, I've rewritten the first book 15 years later. I realized that I could try to write the same book again and never could.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most beautiful sort of revelations of the memoirist is that not only can we usually not avoid writing about the same things, but we ought not even try. Like, that's part of our job, is to sort of enact this evolution of self and of ideas and of style even on the page by sort of churning things over. And, you know, when I look at my favorite writers, even if they're sort of fiction writers who are writing in multiple styles over and over, like I'm thinking of Jeanette Winterson, who's one of my favorite writers, and like you look at her early work, and sometimes it'd be like crazy fabulous stories like The Passion and Written on the Body, and I remember when she published her memoir finally, and I was like, oh, and like so much of her previous books were in that, you know, and just like all the ways that she was sort of digesting and fighting and healing from her own life and her past, you know what I mean? And so I think every artist is sort of doing that in their own way, right? And for me, like, I want to know that my relationship to the largest events in my life and my obsessions is going to change and evolve and grow over time. Like, that's so comforting to me, you know?
Yeah, that I hear what exactly it's evolving, growing, but I tell my students all the time that one of the most challenging parts of being a successful memoirist, I mean, you can write the facts down, but actually transforming that into art and succeeding at that, it's really, really hard because it's asking you basically to have some deep personal insight. It's like you sit down at the beginning and you start writing and you realize by the time the thing is finished, unless it's going to get thrown out, you better have arrived at something about yourself.
Yeah, that's the thing that I think people don't quite know they're signing up for, and maybe that's a good thing, but it's different. And I think, you know, other people writing in other forms have to do this too, some, you know, more than others, and you know, most of my friends are writers and my partners are writers, so I've definitely seen her with a book of poetry like move very clearly through a set of challenges and come out in a different location in her relationship to them. But with Memoirist, it's so specific because you just pick at the beginning the things that you're going to grow around, you know, and then really sort of write your way into a change, which is partly why I think, I don't know, you hear people say a lot like that you should be really far away from the things that you're writing about as a memoirist, and that's not true for me at all. Partly because I have a horrible memory, and so I'm always in a race against my own memory. Like if I were to try to write Whip Smart today, it would be like so impressionistic because I wouldn't remember anything. But also because for me the drive to write is a drive to understand some aspect of my own experience. And so it's usually pretty soon after something has happened. Like I started writing Abandon Me while I was still in the primary relationship that I write about over the course of that. I was in it. And I think I started writing about it as a way to survive it psychically. I was like, I have to transform this into something meaningful, or like I couldn't bear the idea of being in that much pain for no reason, you know? And I was like, well, if I'm going to be living in this emotional hell, I'm at least going to make some aesthetic object out of it. I had a really interesting moment when I was about 2/3 of the way through. The title essay of the book, which I think I'm going to read from later, is really sort of confronts the relationship that the book is structured around. And there was a moment I was at an artist residency, and I was like 2/3 of the way through the story, and I was still in the relationship. And she and I were actually like fighting on the phone nightly. I was like at this artist colony in the woods, and I would be like waving my phone around trying to get a signal so we could continue fighting. And I was like trying to save the but it was just like that thing, you know, when it like cathexis maybe, you know, where you're just like your psychic claws are just all the way in. Like there was no way for me to put it down. But then I would be in my studio in the morning, and I would remember I had all my little note cards up, and I was like telling the story, and at that point I was planning at the end of the book that it was going to have a happy ending. We were going to end up together because that's what I was going to make happen in my life. And I remember having this moment and I was just fully in my writer brain, and, you know, so I wasn't thinking on behalf of like the story I was trying to live in my life. I was totally just, you know, in the beautiful sort of self-forgetting of creating something and looking at it really sort of structurally. And I thought, oh, like the correct ending to this story is that she, the narrator, me, leaves her. Like obviously there's no other correct ending to this story. And then I was like, whoa, ha. Anyway,
back on the phone.
Moving on. And of course, so in that way it was weird. It was sort of like art telling me, like being a more truthful mirror than my own mind for what was going on in my life.
Kind of something a little mystical about the creative process when that happens, I think. As it happens, my recent book, too, didn't have an ending until I ended a relationship, and stumbling upon that was like, that is not the book I thought I was writing. But this is the problem with nonfiction. This is the material. You don't have a choice. You can't say, all right, wait a second. We can do redemption with a happy ending, right? Yeah. But isn't redemption a whole lot more interesting with an unhappy ending?
Well, and in the end, like, I think the fact of it for me is always that I am a really poor judge of what a happy ending is. Like I have really been, I would have just fought to the death for what I thought was a happy ending, and I just, like, in hindsight could not have been more wrong. Right. You know, like the idea that I would still be with this person is just like, I go into it,
what was I thinking?
A blackout just thinking about it.
Has she read the book?
She read the book.
So that kind of takes us out of, that question definitely takes us out of the fascination of what it is really to write memoir, and how, you know, revealing things about ourselves, we surprise ourselves on the page. It brings it right into some reality questions about writing memoir, because once you've done that, you've just exposed yourself to the world and to, more importantly, individuals, you know, within the world. And I think it's really interesting that there's a lot of, like, looking at your narrative character on the page, secrecy is this big theme that runs through a lot of the work. And in fact, in Whip Smart, the subtitle Whip Smart is a true story of a secret life, and there's a lot of secrecy in Labyrinths, the essay that we were talking about in class last night, talking about the secret self and hiding things. And then you write memoirs about all the hiding. It's kind of like, how does that work out, and how does it feel to share that?
Yeah. Well, I think that the epigraph, one of the epigraphs of Abandon Me is this Winnicott quote that I love, that I actually carried around with me. It was almost the epigraph for Whip Smart, but it wasn't quite right. And the quote is, "It is joy to be hidden and disaster not to be found." And when I first heard that, I was like,
oh no,
because it was too true, and it was like the epigraph to my life. And probably would be an apt epigraph to anything I ever write. But I think that those are the sort of dual experiences of the memoirist, right? Like the impression that people get from memoirists, because all they see is what we expose, is that we are like, people are always saying, "Oh, you're so brave," or "You don't mind sharing yourself," or they think we're the type of person who would like spill our whole life story to someone on a bar stool or something. But actually, I found that memoirists are often the opposite of that. They're very private, very secretive people who feel sort of hidden within themselves and maybe trapped in that, right? And so, I think the thing to remember is that a memoir is not written with an audience.
Right.
Even if it's written with an audience in mind, a memoir is written in total solitude,
right.
You know? And so for me, like, my work is very often, you know, what could be described as a conversation that I have alone with myself, right? It's like the conversation I'm afraid to have with anyone else. And so I can only have it alone with myself on the page, right? And then at the end of it, it's such a cathartic and sort of meaningful experience that then I want to share it, right? Because I think when we sort of walk through any kind of fire, we want to show people how it was done, because the curse of secrecy is thinking that you're alone and you're the only one who's ever lived with that particular burden.
But I think it takes a lot of confidence in what you have shared on the page with yourself, that you got it right, and that you're not, I mean, you know, I have this terrible fear that my insights will, once I've shared them with other people, they'll show me all the ways in which my insights were flawed, and I'm like, oh, I didn't realize, you know.
They will. They'll try to, you know. I mean, any nasty thing I've ever thought about myself or my work I've read on the internet, and critics have been very kind to me, you know, but it's just like, it's the internet, that's where we live now. So, you know, I think anyone publishing books today learns not to read Amazon reviews or Goodreads or any of that. Like, I don't, never. But I do think it's like, I don't know, I hold on to it for a really long time, right? That's the beauty of writing. It's like one of the hardest things to do, but nobody has to see you fail. You know, you get to do it. So I think it's a good sort of, it's a province of a lot of perfectionists, right? Because we can practice it in privacy for as long as we need to before anybody sees us do it, and then we just emerge and look like an expert, right?
Right. It's easy. Yeah.
But it's really, really hard. It's like every sentence in both of those books, particularly Abandon Me, I probably rewrote like 20 times, you know.
So switching gears a little bit, because I'm thinking about some of the things that I've talked to my students about the subjects of memoirs and what a memoir can do. I'm often telling them that you really don't have to have any kind of spectacular life experience in order to write a worthwhile memoir. But on the other hand, your life experiences have been pretty intense and pretty, you know, it's like, well, yeah, Melissa spent 4 years working in the dungeon and, you know, had addiction issues and all these kinds of like big high concept kind of things. But I bet you're going to agree with me that, yeah, you know, it doesn't have to be like that.
Totally.
But how can we convince them after, you know, making a name and a career on huge experiences, you know, like I can see inside their minds, and I know that they're thinking like, all right, what I'll do is I will spend a year living in a rat-infested tunnel.
I mean, first of all, I don't think I've been asked a lot of times if I've done things for the material, and the answer is really honestly no, I have not. I really just made those choices because it seemed like a good idea at the time.
I think it's possible people do, but I do not think
I
after
think people
reading your
do,
books.
but I don't think it yields the kind of writing that I'm interested in reading, because I actually want to see the transformation on the page, and you can't schedule that. You know what I mean? But I do think also, like, okay, the dominatrix stuff, like maybe having a sea captain father, are like not totally regular, but addiction is one of the most normal things in the world, right? Yeah. I'm sure everyone in this room has been touched by it. So, like, likewise, mental illness, or I don't know. You know, I think a huge part of being a memoirist and being a writer in general is it's not about transmitting information about the exotic to people. I actually don't think people are very compelled by the exotic. I think that the most satisfying moment for a reader, I should speak for myself, the most satisfying moment for me as a reader is recognition, right? So it's when I read an articulation of something that I already know really deeply, that's deeply familiar to me, but that I've been unable to put words to, afraid to put words to, or haven't even thought to name. You know what I mean? Like, there's, for the writer, there has to be a distance, this objectification of a self, right? So like when I, you know, some of my favorite moments of reading are seeing people name, you know, parts of the child's experience, like aspects of my childhood, because we're so alone inside of our experiences as children, because we have no words to name them, and because it isn't the habit of adults to like speak frankly about experience to children. So when I grew up as a kid, I was like, what are all these feelings? And like, why do I feel sad when I hear doves cry? Like I actually remember sort of being a kid and feeling like I had this like super intense, uncontrollable like channel to the sublime inside of me, and feeling completely overwhelmed by like art or music or like my empathy for animals or whatever. And there was just like no conversation about any of that. Oh. It was just like school and bedtimes and like, and I have very open parents, but anyway, so just like seeing my own experiences named even now as an adult. Like I recently read a friend's book and he just like articulated childhood, the sort of like hysterical, hyper smart, like really moody little artist child's experience that I was like, because I just recognized it completely, you know? And so I actually don't think the things that people connect to in Whipsmart have anything to do with the dominatrix stuff, you know? Most of the people that I hear from about my work are people who don't share my concrete experiences, but share the feelings or the mechanisms or the habitual stuff. Yeah. That's in
Although, I mean, I think we have to acknowledge, I mean, and it's not interesting enough to do more than acknowledge this, I think, but there's the publishing pressure.
Yeah. There is. But you know what? That is like, it's a gross game, but it also isn't, they know that people are interested in books about regular people, right? But you have to learn to sort of speak that language or whatever. Like, nobody wanted to publish Whipsmart. They were like, oh no.
Really?
You know, oh my God, it was rejected by over 40 publishers. Yeah. Like there was only one offer and it was the last one. You know, like nobody. And it's interesting because like the book got a lot of attention. Like it, you would think. Yeah. But people were like, I mean, first of all, publishing is still run by a lot of like old guard conservative folks who are gonna die off soon, but they really hadn't in 2010, and they still kind of haven't. But it was just like, oh yuck, that's yucky, you know. Yeah. And I also think that because it was sort of like, it wasn't the sensational tabloid like story. It was like a really unsexy book about sex, you know, and it was like really sort of intellectual and feminist and
well, that's what I was going to say. What do you think they were really allergic to? And I think it was the feminism.
I think they weren't, and I even think it was mismarketed in some ways because they just didn't. How do you promote a like unsexy feminist book about sex work? Like it wasn't, and I got a lot of that. Yeah, I got a bunch of responses from publishers that were either like, this has been done too many times before, or there's just no precedent for it. And I was like, you can't, you know, so you actually don't know what people are going to bite.
Well, I've always thought that the title of the book is kind of perfect because it's Whipsmart and the word smart is the word. It's like, well, we know what to do with the whip part, right? But we don't know how to market the whip part with the smart part. But, it seems like it worked out okay.
It worked out okay. I have no regrets and a lot of gratitude.
Yeah, and when marketing and publicity people say we don't know what to do with this work, sometimes I just want them to trust the process and let's just see, trust it. I just want to kind of tip to the future a little bit before switching to the reading. We were talking a few minutes ago about this sort of trajectory that Memoirist will go through in her work where, you're kind of growing, and as you're growing and blossoming, your work is going along with you. So you have a new book coming out in 2020. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about where that will take you.
It's actually coming out in 2021 now.
Because
I was like, I need more time. Yeah. And they were like, the election, and so,
Well, we'll have to. The election will make sense after you tell us what it is, I suppose.
Oh no, it's just no publishers want to publish any books in the fall. There will be no books coming out that are not politically focused in the fall.
Really?
Because it would be so hard to get any media attention because everything's going to be political.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean that's even true now.
Yeah,
it's been true since. I mean, I published Abandon Me in early 2017, and that was true then as well.
Yeah, we've had novelists come through here, our series here, talking about how hard it is the last 3 years, really.
For novelists, it's even harder.
Yeah, how do you publicize a novel? Nobody wants to read a novel right now.
Yeah.
They want to talk about the world is ending, which is understandable.
Yeah, it's really intense.
Yeah.
So it's called Girlhood, and it's coming out in 2021, and it's an essay collection. And it's sort of both rewinds and fast forwards time in terms of these books, and it's sort of all essays that take my experience as a child, but more as an adolescent, and sort of looks at the beliefs and ideas and I guess the beliefs and ideas that sort of we are educated in and socialized in as girls and as people in a patriarchal society, and the work that it takes in my 20s and 30s and I assume my 40s to undo that. So a lot of it is sort of looking at the frames of mind that led to both of these experiences. So it's sort of the before and then after these.
Yeah. There's poetry in both of your books, in your writing style, but they really are different experiences to read. The longer memoir, Whip Smart, really does have this very clear narrative thread. And a lot of the essays in Abandon Me are more impressionistic, kind of circling around and trying to get at something. I just am curious if you can tell us what to expect from Girlhood.
Yeah, Girlhood, my partner described the essays in Girlhood as lanyards, like little camp bracelets, because a lot of them take sort of multiple strands and establish them and then start weaving them together, and then it sort of tightens and tightens and tightens. So I think it's actually more linear in some ways than Abandon Me, but it uses a lot of research. There's some investigative journalism. There's some cultural critique. There's it has a lot of different elements. A lot of that. So there's a couple straightforward personal essays, but a lot of them use a bunch of different elements and different kinds of research. And I would say that it has a little bit more of an outward gaze. Abandon Me was a deep dive inward, and this is sort of moving outward.
It's a funny thing about the outward gaze. We try to do that, and people say, stop navel gazing, gaze out. But then you turn in the manuscript, and they're like, we need a little more inward.
Yeah, there's there's still quite a bit of inward. But yeah, I'm excited about it. I was actually working on it this morning. It's illustrated.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it has. I worked with an illustrator who's doing these panels, one for each of the essays that are based on William Morris's sort of arts and crafts work. So the illustrated Canterbury Tales, they have these beautiful plates that have like an intricate sort of border and then a scene kind of from the essay with a line from it. They're really gorgeous.
Oh, that sounds
So
really
I'm
beautiful.
excited. Yeah.
Cool. We multimedia, mixed media is kind of one of the ways we're kind of collapsing or taking down the barriers of what a book should be, and traditional ideas of books are words. They're not. People are doing so many graphic narratives and graphic memoirs now. I think that's wonderful. Okay, well, so this would be a really great moment for us to move you to the podium if you like,
Okay,
so we
cool.
can get some
Sounds
reading.
good. Sounds good.
Let me make sure that.
I'm just gonna grab my water.